Oh, hi, good morning, everybody. Um, Welcome to the Digital Solutions at UCS webinar on the subject of developing a digital product or service with Dr Stuart Brown from Evenwood Ltd. So my name is Hannah Smith and I am the project manager for Digital Solutions. Before I hand over to Stuart, I just wanted to do a quick overview of the Digital Solutions project. Just a few slides, just a couple of things. We are recording the webinar today, just that we can play that again for anybody to catch up or watch it on our website. So bear with me 1 second. So just to run through the Digital Solutions project before I hand over to Stuart. So Digital Solutions is an RDF and Chester University funded project up to June 2023. And we support SMEs in the areas of structure and Telford and Wrekin with a minimum of 12 hours fully funded support and longer-term collaboration opportunities. The aim of Digital Solutions is to support SMEs with digital innovation, whether that's to solve issues or problems with either existing digital products, processes or services, or the development of new ones. Examples may include identifying suitable platforms and supporting the movement of services online, such as learning courses, developing prototype internal systems such as stock management, or the development of prototype apps for selling products and services. We can also help to identify funding opportunities that can support development of such as Innovate UK. In order to further develop your digital innovation, we have expertise available to provide advice and guidance to progress your product and service, support its development to market. These can include looking at new market opportunities, reviewing current digital capabilities, evaluations of products and services, and identifying collaborative opportunities. Stuart, who I'm about to hand over to in a second, supports Digital Solutions by providing expertise to our businesses in key areas of digital product and service development. So if you have an idea or would simply like to discuss how we may be able to help, then please get in touch with us via our website or through our business development managers, Nikki and Sarah, who are on this webinar today. And if you can put any questions in the chat function and we'll respond to you around that. Now, I am really pleased now to hand over to Dr. Stuart Brown from Evenwood, who will then talk about and share his experience of knowledge and expertise on the development of digital products and services. Over to you, Stuart.
Thanks, Hannah. Good morning, everyone. I'm Stuart Brown. I'm from a company called Evenwood Ltd, small company offering consultancy in Shropshire, based in Shropshire near Shrewsbury. So just bear with me a second while I share my screen. So, as Hannah mentioned, I'm working as a consultant on the Digital Solutions project. So if you start working with University Centre Shrewsbury, or University of Chester, sorry, with this program, then one of the options is to work with a consultant as part of your support, and so you can get some of my time helping you do the product development side of things. So I am going to take you through what we're going to cover on the agenda today. I'm hoping to keep it fairly flexible as there's a reasonable number of people on the meeting. So I'll start with a quick introduction and then I'm going to get you to do something. So I don't want to do all the thinking and the talking and doing. So I'm going to ask you to do a little survey. And then we'll talk about product development in a little bit more detail and what your product does and how you might think about managing some of this. I think it's worth pointing out that the sort of things that I'm going to talk about today are very high level, and I really want to make you think. I really want you to take this time to sit and reflect about what you're doing with your own products, your own development stuff, and just have a think about whether you're doing the right things. Could you do things slightly differently? I mean, how often do we get time to reflect? So please use today to do that and to indulge yourselves a little bit. So introduction, this is what I look like when I'm not on a computer screen with headphones on. So maybe not too dissimilar, but even the corners of my mouth turn down when I'm smiling. So I try not to be miserable, but sometimes I do look that way. I started life as an engineer. So I used to design plastic injection mold tools. So there's the diagram on the right hand side is a general assembly drawing. I used to do those by hand on paper on huge A0 size paper on a drawing board. And then we started with AutoCAD. So that was a 2D CAD and then a 3D CAD. And the reason for talking to you about that was the changes that happened through that sort of digital revolution of CAD back in the 80s, 90s and the 2000s, and it's ongoing now, has really revolutionized lots of design engineering businesses. And I'll reflect myself on a little bit of this and bring some of my thoughts back into the presentation later on around this subject. So hopefully it's useful to think about. And what we used to make from these general assemblies were great big tools, great big hunks of metal, very complex. So you'd have the geometry that you're trying to create would be in here somewhere. And then you'd have all sorts of pins sticking up that push the part out of the machine after it's been molded. You'd have water cooling. There'd be all sorts of things on here, really complex. But a great introduction to engineering, professional life, and, as I say, the changes that came about as part of digital technologies. So one of those tools would go into a great big machine like that. You'd put plastic granules into the hopper there, and they'd get squeezed into the tool through a hydraulic, usually a hydraulic piston there. And then at the end of it, you get some plastic parts. So this is just a random selection of plastic parts, but a lot of the components, the laptop that you're using or the phone that you're using, the headphones that I'm using, loads of these things are made in this way. And I'm sure you're familiar with lots of those. But we'll reflect on that and come back to that later. So after starting off as an engineer, I went to university and started to get interested in research, and I did some research, and that's where the PhD came from. And I was using the advances in digital, so the changes into 3D CAD, 3D printing or rapid prototyping was coming of age. And what I did was to link those two things together, and my experience and my background in engineering. So I actually built 3D models of things using the rapid prototyping technology, but instead of using those as the final part, I use those as the mold tools. So you were actually very quickly creating the molds to squirt the plastic into to get the components, which rapidly changed the amount of time that you needed to get the parts created, because otherwise you have to machine hard pieces of metal to do that. After doing the research, I started working on the interface between research and business. So dipping my toe back into the private sector as well as working in the public sector with academics and researchers. And I started to support companies using my engineering knowledge and expertise and different technologies. And I started to do the things on this gap, this bridge between universities and business. And in a way, since then, that's what I've been doing for most of my career. And it's always been innovation based, and it's always had a technology slant, but it's much more involved with the boundary at the business side these days. And I've got a background in technology transfer. So I work with academics, small companies, researchers, big companies, you name it. If there's a technology that's innovative that somebody's interested in, there's a potential deal to be done. But to get there first, there's usually lots of stages of development and demonstrations and all sorts of different things. So this is where Evenwood came from this sort of background of engineering and technology transfer. So Evenwood offers services to universities, to small companies, big companies, whoever needs that sort of hands-on help to support product development and translation of products into the commercial world and to bigger contracts. I'm always happy to have a chat if I can fit it in the diary. I used to say always happy to meet up for a coffee, but that's not been the case for the last year and a half. But yeah, things are starting to open up, which is good to see. So it's time for you to help me out a little bit, just to understand who's on the call, what your experiences are of product development, and why you're on this workshop this morning, just so that I get a feel of who I'm talking to in the audience. So what I've set up is a little tool called Slido, and it's an online survey tool. So if you go to slido.com, I'm going to ask you to take part in an active poll. So you should be able to do this from a mobile phone or a laptop or a tablet, and you join at slido.com and you enter the number on the screen. So if you could do that, I'll just give you a couple of minutes to get on board, and as you start filling in the results, they should appear on the screen, hopefully, if it's all working properly. Yes, it's working. That's good to see. So we've got business development, your skill set. What is your skill set? Are you a techie person? Are you a business development person? Are you the one that always comes up with the good ideas? Do you deal mostly in finance? Are you a project manager? I'm just trying to get an idea of who I'm talking to. So we've only had a couple of responses so far. Hopefully people are managing to get onto the slido.com okay. So number one's coming up, ideas, people. That's good on a product development webinar. And of course, you may recognize yourself as cutting across some of these. Okay. Good. I'll just give you one more minute because I think there should be more responses than that, but I'll just give you one more minute and then we'll move on. Okay, so you're mostly ideas people with a bit of a mixture of business development and project managers. Okay, good. So the next question is, why have you joined this webinar? I'm interested in your motivation for listening to me this morning. Would you like to develop your own products and services, but you don't know where to start? Is that where you're at? Or are you already in the process of developing your own products and services? So you've already started. Or did this webinar just sound interesting and you kind of had nothing better to do? So we've got an even split at the moment of some that would like to develop their own products and services and some that already are. So that's interesting. Okay. So more on the side of developing than we'd like to develop. Okay, good. And which of these situations, or which of these statements rather, describes you best? Are you at the stage of you've just got an idea, or you've got a plan, you know what you're doing, or you've maybe reached the stage where you've developed a rough prototype, maybe you've even established and have a team and a plan. You might even be ready to launch. You may already have launched, and you might be looking to launch your next product or to diversify. So which of these statements describes your situation? So it looks like most people are at the idea stage, but some have prototypes, some have a team, some have a plan, some are ready to launch, some already have customers. That's good to see. Okay. Right. So I believe if you wanted to ask questions, you can do it. There's a Q&A session, and I can pull a screen back on at the end, and hopefully we'll see things that you've entered. I hope that works, but we'll find out. If not, we'll resort to the good old-fashioned way of just taking the presentation off the screen, and you can stick your hand up and ask me questions. But if you wanted to use that function, you can do that in the background while I'm talking about other things. Okay, so product development, new product development drivers. The functions on the triangles there that you can see. So we've got product design, product marketing, product management, product development. This is just a tool that I've pulled off the internet. And a lot of the things that I'm showing you today are just things that you can find on the internet. And there's an awful lot out there about new product development and innovation and project management and product marketing. So there's a wealth of information out there. But as I said at the beginning, what I want you to do today is to think and reflect. So some of you have got products on the go and almost ready to launch. Some have launched, and I'd be interested to know which of these functions you used and what importance did you place on these functions. And if you're about to start that process of product development, where would you start? Which one would you pick? How do you start this process off? And I think it's an interesting dilemma for some people, and it's interesting as well that people with different backgrounds or skill sets, which is why I asked the question earlier, would probably approach this from different angles. So people with a background in engineering or design or something like that might start at the product design phase, or if you were a techie, you might start at the product development phase. If you're a business development person, you might start at the product marketing stage. And if you're a project manager, you probably start at product management. And to me, there's no absolute right and wrong, and what you do and how you run this thing is about being agile and being able to move around and change your plans and change your approach. But it's also being cognizant of other drivers around how you develop your product. So for example, another way of representing this triangle, this relationship, is that your product is the thing that sits at the middle, and the things that affect it are technology, users and business, but also your product affects those functions as well. And just to sort of think our way through that a little, if you imagine that you were a techie and you discovered the best new way of doing something, and you were really excited about that, and you just wanted to create a product that used that function. So that whether that be AI or blockchain or whatever it is, sometimes people create products because they've got an interest in a certain area. But you need to make sure that your users understand your product and want your product. You need to make sure that your business can stand up based upon the amount of sales that you're going to have, and the functions that you've got in your business need to be aligned to making money and to making things work. So it's all interactive. It all interacts. And I think it's particularly difficult for people that have just got an idea and maybe on their own. Maybe they're a very small company and they don't have a team working with them. So how do you work your way through that? As I say, there's a wealth of information on the internet around this sort of thing, but where do you start? So here's an example of one of the things that I found from 4-week MBA. And you can start by doing your idea generation. You can screen your ideas. You can do some testing, business case analysis, product development, test. And these processes work. If you follow them and you're skilled in following them, you can do an awful lot and get, keep your development on the right track. But it's difficult. It's difficult, particularly if you're a very small company. So I'm just going to break there just for a moment, and I'm just going to stop sharing for a moment so I can hopefully see your videos. Feel free to turn your videos back on. And if anyone has a comment or a question based on this, a reflection that you've already made and you want to share that, feel free. Just stick your hand up or turn your microphone off and let's have a quick chat. Has anyone been in a situation where you've just had the idea and you need to do all these things but you don't know where to start? Is anyone feeling interactive
Stuart,
this morning? Joe?
Yeah. I just want to reflect on some of that, certainly in the context of some of the health products and some of the work we've been doing with some of the health tech. Because I think one of the descriptions you described there about that, the development of a great idea and you come up with the idea. I think sometimes as well, it's the interesting challenge about how you develop that great idea with understanding the market you're looking into as well, because there's been a lot of technology developments within health field, but may not necessarily be within the context of the strategic priorities of the health services, or it might be somebody who's had a lot of personal experience in health, but they might be one person in a population of, so there's something around that co-creation development bit as well, which I think comes in part of your triangle bit as well. But I just want to say that sometimes the market themselves can help shape that development, as well as the enthusiasm, the passion of the entrepreneur and the developer itself. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And funnily enough, we'll come on to some things, some little tools next around this. But yeah, absolutely, you get push and pull in different directions from different angles, for sure. Okay, we'll continue then through the presentation. So what does your product do? So as I mentioned, you may have come up with this wonderful idea. You start off with a few features. You start to develop those features. If you're a developer, you might have a plan to include this big thing. You've got this concept and you've got the heart of the technologies wrapped around blockchain or AI or whatever it is, or it might be a real simple set of features. So you've got that in mind. Or if you're an entrepreneur and you've just got an idea, no idea how to develop it, but that the market needs it, how do you decide on setting up your features and how do you communicate that? If you're a project manager looking after the product development, how do you make sure that the product development's keeping on track and that you're not getting what they call scope creep? How do you keep everything together? And there's lots of tools to do this, and I'm not saying there's any right or wrongs, but I like really simple things. So one of the tools that I came across was about features, advantages, and benefits. And this image, you know, I've put a reference at the bottom. There's a blog feature on this. And this tool is not really about product development in a way. It's about sales. This really is a selling tool. This is a tool that helps people to communicate to others what are the benefits, because you sell the benefits. You shouldn't be selling features of your product. You should be selling the benefits of your product. So the features of the product are what it does. The advantages of those features you can list down, but it's what are the benefits to the people that are actually buying. That's the important thing when you're selling. So I'll take you through this, then I'll explain to you how I use it, because I don't just use it as a sales tool. So again, this was taken from the same website, but what you do is you start off by just creating a table, or you could do it on you know, a few sheets of paper, or on sticky notes, or on a virtual whiteboard, whatever your preference of doing it is. And I often use this tool with clients that I work with. And what I get them to do is to just start to list out the features of their product. So the first phase, you just list all the features. What does it do? Just create a list of them. And then you step through and you create a list of the advantages. So for example, the feature of this product is that it's got an automated setup. An advantage of that is that there's less training needed. And because it's automated, it's consistently reproducing results. So you can see how one column leads to the next, and you can build up that knowledge. The benefit, though, to the end user, the customer, is knowing that they've got everything under control. It's automated, you can rely on it, done, sorted. That's a big benefit to me. I don't have to intervene and do all this every time myself. The next one down is an example. So coherent, complete audit trail. Easier audit prep. You know that it's 100% prepared for the audit. So again, these are the benefits that you're trying to sell, not the other way around. So we'll come back to this in a little while, but this is, if you don't get anything else from today, just do this as a simple reflection, or if you're interested, we could work on this together through the Digital Solutions project. But this is one of the tools that I often use. And again, it's a time for reflection, and you get interesting things coming from it as an exercise. So this is something that I've taken from the Board of Innovation. And if you look at traditional industries and how they develop products, so let's take the car manufacturing industry. They spend an awful lot of time prototyping and developing and changing things. And going back many years, you know, it used to be, right, we've got a design, we'll just build it. So they build, and they'll keep it all secret. And then at some point in the future, we've got a release date, bang, we'll go to market. So the risk that you have in some of that is actually very high, because you're starting off with a low risk here, but by the time you first validate that new car design, you've built up an awful lot of risk. You've spent an awful lot of time developing. You've cut a lot of metal. You've molded lots of plastic bits. You've put an engine together. And of course, there's things that you can do in the meantime to mitigate some of that risk. But just think about this as a concept, really, that you know, you could create your digital product and you could build, keep it all to yourself. Don't tell anyone about it. Don't ask anyone of their opinion, but by the time you're released, you're happy. But will the market be? Will anyone buy it? So this approach can be high risk. Of course, it does keep your idea confidential because you're keeping it to yourself. But just think about the implications of that. The same site, the Board of Innovation, have this approach. So this is more of a lean, agile sort of process. And this is where you do short sprints, you do short bits of development, you experiment, you quickly release to, could be a small group, could be a big group, but you quickly release and you get quick validation of what you're doing so that your risk actually for each stage is low. And depending on the results that you get back, your accumulated risk could be way lower than the approach that we've just seen. So you get multiple iterations of your product, you get multiple iterations of feedback from your, of validation from your user group, which could of course be customers. So when you put those two together, you can see the difference. You've potentially got much less risk in the iterative approach, or a much more manageable risk in the iterative approach. Now, just reflecting back on what I talked about earlier, this is a mold tool. It's not one I've designed. Again, this is just a photo from the internet, but I've designed mold tools much, much bigger than this. And just this tool would cost tens of thousands of pounds. It's all made from very special metal materials, you know, certain hardness, certain types of, you know, stainless steel, for example, very complex components. Some of these things are machined out, some are created with much more complex methods. So the investment in building some of these things is huge. And just thinking back to the digital revolution that I spoke about in design back in the sort of 80s, 90s, 2000s, and it's still going on now. I remember the way that we used to do this design process on the drawing board or on AutoCAD. You design the full tool, and when it was ready, you'd issue the drawings, and then they would get machined, and then at the end of that process, you had the tool ready. So that would be your big slope, your zero iteration sort of process. When we started using 3D CAD, I was creating some of these bits on 3D CAD, and before all of the modeling was finished, that was going straight down to the workshops to be starting the machining process. So they'd start roughing out some of these cavities, or they'd start cutting the blocks out for this. So it's similar in a way to digital products and services, that you can start doing things and validate as you go along. In some cases, the product design, so the actual design of these features that would be on the plastic part, some of those hadn't even been finalized before we started cutting metal on these. But there was still a risk because you're cutting metal and it was an expensive process. I think what you have with digital products and services is actually a lot more flexibility to be iterative, to experiment, to take the risks, and to get quick feedback and validation. So one of the things I'd like you to reflect on today is this thought about being brave and to do some of these things, particularly with digital products and services. Hope that makes sense as an analogy. And just bringing a couple of those things together, as I say, the features, advantages and benefits is effectively a sales tool. And this is a way of managing your product development. But what I found actually was I quite like using this in a different way. So what I do when I talk to my clients is I say, okay, which of these features have you tested? Which of these features and advantages have you validated with your potential customer base? And then we start looking at things like minimum viable product. What is it that you need before you can confidently launch to the market? What features are necessary? Which ones don't even get used in products? You could build the best digital product and not use half the features. So have you validated that? And so I use this features, advantages, benefits in a different way. And I use the list of features and looking at their benefits to validate the different releases and different iterations of product as you start that development process. And because we're all about multiple iterations, this of course changes over time. So none of the tools, none of the documents that I use, I expect to be static documents. I expect everything to be dynamic and to be changed and refreshed, and so that's just a bit of a way that I do things slightly differently. So coming back to these new product development drivers, I think it's important to consider as you're going along through your product development process, what the drivers are, what's driving what. And at the end of the day, you want to launch a product that's accepted by the market, that makes you money, because that's what you're in business for. And whether that's working with the new technologies or old technologies, it doesn't really matter in a way, as long as you're providing the features, advantages and benefits that people want to buy, and you're managing it in a way that makes sense for your business, and it doesn't get out of control, and you can keep on top of it, and that your users are interacting with. It's great to have an active user group, because you're going to get lots of good feedback, and you know what, you're going to get lots of good ideas for your next product iteration or your new products. So I hope that's made some sense. As I say, it's quite a high level introduction to digital product development, and hopefully the analogies weren't too left field for you, but that's my presentation bit done with, and I'd love to hear your questions if you've got any, and if this has worked, which I don't know if it has, but if this works, we can do it through this Q&A, or we can put hands up and do it in a different way. That's absolutely fine. Let's see. No, that maybe hasn't worked. I'll just stop presenting and see if I can pull up those. But while I'm doing that, if you could have a think about whether you've got any questions, that would be great. I see we've got one comment in the chat from Pascal. Thank you, Pascal. I appear to have problems with the Q&A session. Oh, we have one question. What are some key skills you think are important for someone in innovation to have? I would say one of the things I've found quite important over the years is the ability to be flexible in your approach, particularly if you're the main entrepreneur behind these things, and you're leading it all, and a lot of the pressure's on your shoulders. You need to be flexible in how you go about things, I think. Another thing I would say is resilience is quite important. These aren't generally easy journeys. So as you develop things and as you work with different people, you're bound to have, you know, ups and downs along the way. So being resilient and keeping your eyes on the goal, I think is important. So another question we have here is, do you have any advice on protecting IP in development? Yes, there's obviously different sorts of intellectual property. So there are some types of intellectual property that are called automatic rights. So things like that are copyright and a certain type of design right as well. And that means that if you create something, if you write it down, or if you draw something or you create something, you own the copyright. You've been the creator, you've been the person creating that. So that's a right you don't have to register, but you do have to be aware of. You can put the little copyright logo on things. And what that does is provide you a certain amount of a protection that you know, people shouldn't be copying your stuff, particularly if it's commercial. And if they do, and if you can provide evidence that you were the creator, and that's an important bit, then there is some law around that stops people from copying your stuff. There's also things that you can register in terms of intellectual property. So things like registered designs, patents. Patents don't always apply to digital things, but they can. You can patent some things in the digital realm. They're more akin to things that can be made or manufactured, but it is possible to patent some things like certain algorithms and such like. You can register designs, so how things look and feel, but again, another way of dealing with intellectual property, depending on the sort of stuff that you're doing, is thinking about things like trade secrets. So do you keep the way that you do things? If you've got a certain way of doing something that really works, do you keep that secret? Do you make sure that no one else can find out how you do that? That might be one way of doing it. An example of that would be things like the recipe to Coca-Cola. You know, that's something that's kept very secret, and only 2 people allegedly know the full ingredients. Do you have any examples of collaboration agreements when working to develop the product with others? Yes, there are lots of things out there. I don't know if anyone's a member of things like the Federation of Small Businesses, or if you're working with universities, there are some agreements that you can find online, which I'll try and remember the name of, but yeah, there are things out there, and I do have examples of those. Quite often when you're looking at agreements, I would say the things to consider that you want to be careful of are obviously things like IP ownership. So who owns the intellectual property? If someone else is helping you to develop, make sure that if it's your business and you're asking them to develop that you own the intellectual property. The other things to think about with agreements is what happens if it goes wrong. And that's often the biggest thing that people overlook when they're drafting an agreement. You'll say who owns what, and you know, what does it all mean, but it doesn't actually often say who owns what happens if things go wrong. And that's particularly important, I would say, if you end up creating a company and you have different shareholders. That's something you want to make sure you're on top of. With digital products, any advice on ensuring user data is secure? I'm not a security expert, so I'd probably learn. And there's plenty of advice and information out there on that kind of thing. Any other questions?
Stuart, just picking on that last one, I don't know the general system around the cyber security. I don't know whether there's people on the audience who are particularly interested in my help, but there are some accreditation agencies that people can use. I know Shropshire Council were very keen about using Orca for the accreditation of the tool. I know a lot of NHS products, and there are other things which they will actually do almost like the testing of the product to ensure that it's got those security safeguards in place before it'll even enable it to go into any wider health products, etc. So I can't talk about the general commercial sector. I don't know what the bigger commercial companies would want. They may have the other standards, obviously things like the ISOs, but certainly from a health sector, I can talk about the fact there are some recommended approaches that people use that some of the HSNs have been pushing.
Thanks, Joe. Are there any other questions? Okay, well, thanks for listening. As I say, if any of this have been any of interest to you,
Sure, Stuart's gone there. Well, that was the right time of leaving Stuart right at the end. Right, I'll see if Stuart comes back, but I just want to say thank you to Stuart for doing today's webinar. I think it's been really interesting. Oh, Stuart, you left them for a minute. You're back now. You froze for a second.
Yeah, what a day to have an unstable internet, but never mind.
Sorry, I was just thanking you actually as you froze for today, and hopefully everyone's found that really interesting. I was just saying thank you for everybody attending. Obviously, if anybody's got any further questions or they want some more information about digital solutions, then obviously please get in contact with us on the emails that we'll put up earlier and contact numbers. Just a couple of things before people do leave is that we have a couple of other events coming up, one on the 30th of June around the topic of employer engagement and the opportunities available through UCS and Chester University. And we also have our DING 5, which is happening on the 14th of July. I think Verity was going to put them in the chat, the links to Eventbrite to register for those. So if anybody would like to attend those, then please do. And unless anybody has anything else, then I'd just like to say thank you very much. And thank you, Stuart, again, for providing us with that really helpful information. I hope that's helped people, and please get in contact with any further questions. But if that's all for today, and we hope to see you all at our next event on the 30th of June and at our DING event. So thank you very much, everybody, and we'll catch you all soon.